Welcome to Front and Center's 2026 legislative briefing. Here is what we will cover during today's briefing. A quick overview of the 2026 legislative session, the landscape, and some issues that we can expect. Some coverage from our partners at the Statewide Poverty Action Network and protecting the social safety net. Making a case for energy affordability and some of the work that we're doing around House Bill 1903. Protecting climate revenue and environmental justice investments, and then ending with our Cumulative Risk Burden Pollution Act. We have a series of guest speakers who will be covering some of these topics, as well as a member of the State House of Representatives. So just to introduce some of those folks, we have Debelina Banerjee, who is Senior Policy Manager at Puget Sound SAGE. Her work includes research-based analysis of climate policies, campaign support on climate justice issues, and building power within SAGE's local and statewide climate coalitions. Debelina has research experience in transit-oriented development, the environmental impacts of unorganized industries, and project management for real estate development. In addition, she has extensive experience working with grassroots activists and marginalized communities in India. So let's welcome Debelina. We also have Mia Ayala Marshall. Mia leads the Clean Air Program at the Duwamish River Community Coalition, a nonprofit organization focused on empowering a healthy and just environment in the Duwamish Valley. The Clean Energy Program fosters collaboration and innovation among government, industry, and community partners for cleaner air and better health outcomes in the Duwamish Valley. We also have Martha Lucas. Martha Lucas is a Seattle native and proud Garfield Bulldog and double Husky with her bachelor's in political science and master's in health administration. She leads the Washington State Coalition of African Community Leaders, which currently has 181 Afro-Diaspora Coalition members, 75 nonprofit or business members, and 106 individual members. The community coalition leaders have a combined social media platform of 100 community members, 140,000 community members. Last but not least is Leanna Crescent, who is policy and field campaign manager at the Statewide Poverty Action Network. SPAN is one of our closest partners here at Front and Center, and they will be speaking to some of these issues that are impacting the social safety net here in Washington State. We also have from the Front and Center team, Cameron Steinbeck, who is our climate justice policy manager, as well as Jamie Hearn, who is the climate and community planning lead, who will be touching on the Cumulative Risk Burden Pollution Act. We also have Aksa Mengal, who is the climate and energy policy lead with Front and Center, and she will be touching on the energy assistance program that we are trying to push with House Bill 1903. We also have Michael Patchke, who is our environmental justice analyst, who leads the analysis for the budget, for the operating budget, as well as some of the Climate Commitment Act dollars that the state legislature allocates. We also have Representative Charlotte Mena, who represents the 29th Legislative District down in Tacoma, who is the sponsor of both 1903 and 1303, which we will be discussing here shortly. Representative Mena is the proud daughter of Mexican immigrants. She is first-generation Mexican-American and first in her family to graduate from college. Charlotte was born and raised in the Tri-Cities. Her parents worked on farms and a meat processing plant. Her working-class upbringing has informed her perspective, and she continues to drive her to empower working families through policy and change. She's a graduate of the Washington State University with a degree in communications and philosophy. Charlotte has over a decade of experience at various levels of government. She began her career in the U.S. House of Representatives as a communications manager and later a communications director. She returned to Washington State to work with the Washington State Senate and worked for former Governor Jay Inslee. She currently works at the Washington State Department of Ecology, advancing environmental justice, protecting clean air and water, and implementing climate action. Charlotte is a community organizer and a co-creator of Voter Turnup, a movement led by people of color to promote voter registration, cultural expression, and civic engagement. She also serves as a board member of the South Tacoma Neighborhood Council. She works at the neighborhood level to help build up her community. In the legislature, she serves as the chair of the State Government and Tribal Relations Committee. In addition, she serves on the Environment and Energy Committee, Finance Committee, and is a member of the Washington State Latino Democratic Caucus. Here is a picture of some of the members of the Front and Center Coalition. The coalition is made up of 70 community-based organizations all across Washington state that are working to advance environmental justice policies and budgets that are really centered around helping improving the lives of frontline communities. We know that climate change is here, but we also know that climate change is not impacting every community in the same way. There are some community members that are exposed to different kinds of pollution that might decrease their life expectancy, that might add to different kinds of cardiovascular disease, lung issues that we're seeing that just overall contribute to their communities not being able to thrive in the ways that we know that they should be. So this picture was taken during one of our advocacy days in 2025, where members were gathered to help inform members of the state legislature of our legislative priorities. So we just wanted to make sure that folks here on the call know that the coalition is made up of real community members from real community-based organizations that are working to advance environmental justice in different parts of the state, whether that be Yakima, Tacoma, Bellingham, Southwest Washington, or in the Puget Sound region. The environmental justice movement lives with them and is being advanced by the work that they do at the local level. So this is not a full comprehensive look at what is going to be facing the legislature. There are many issues regarding housing that aren't included in here, but I mean, maybe some of our members will talk about, and just different issues related to transportation that the legislature will have to take into account. So we know it's not just climate, environmental justice issues that the state legislature will focus on. But we want to make sure that our priorities and the priorities of our community coalition are heard and prioritized in their discussions. Next slide, please. So now I will introduce Leanna from Statewide Poverty Action Network, who will give an overview of what the Statewide Poverty Action Network is going to be prioritizing this session. I wanted to invite Leanna from SPAN because SPAN is one of our close partners. Our top priority for the budget this year is going to be protecting the social safety net, and SPAN has a lot of work on that. So that is not typically where we lobby from. So I wanted to make sure that we bring some expertise from the Statewide Poverty Action Network to help inform some of our work. And Leanna will give her contact information at the end here. So now I will turn it over to Leanna to speak to some of the work that SPAN does and some of the things that they'll be looking at this session.
Hi, thanks so much. Thanks, Guillermo. Thanks so much for having me here today. Like Guillermo said, my name is Leanna Crescen. I use she, her pronouns, and I work at Poverty Action. Like he already mentioned, this session is going to be unlike any other. We're already in this massive budget deficit, and there were some laws passed at the federal level. So, in our work at Poverty Action, we really want to think about how community members living on the lowest incomes in our state are impacted. So, I'm going to take a minute to give some context about the bill that we call HR 1, that big bill that Trump signed into effect this summer, the impacts it's going to have on folks receiving public benefits, and then how that sets us up for the context we're in for this legislative session. So starting off with some impacts from HR 1. So the first thing, something that is a hallmark of living in poverty is uncertainty. And this bill has added a lot of uncertainty about what's going to happen to my food benefits and my medical benefits. There's also already, we're seeing longer wait times for folks trying to access help through DSHS. Folks already are experiencing wait times up to 3 hours, and we're imagining those will get longer and longer. as folks are trying to navigate all of these different hurdles. There's new work requirements that are in place now for SNAP that have begun but are again unclear, adding to this sort of like lack of clarity and fear. These will also start for Medicaid, but not till next year. There's also a huge amount of new requirements that have been added to folks. So, in addition to the work requirements, folks are being asked to check in more often, provide different documentation. And we know that these additional burdens mean that people will be kicked off of programs because they're unable to navigate all of this red tape. We also know that folks with different immigration statuses were really targeted by this bill. And many will choose to leave the programs because of fears of additional targeting, maybe data sharing, maybe public charge. There's just a lot at stake. I will give a quick shout out to Washington State having a lookalike program for SNAP. So folks who are accessing SNAP now and have lost their eligibility based on immigration status still can receive food. It will just cost the state more, but again, those fears may persist. Adding insult to injury, I like to call out just the ongoing false narratives and disrespect that folks on benefits have to deal with on the day-to-day in the media from folks in power, and just how that can really impact your experience as well. So what are we doing about it? What's it going to look like next year? So again, given the budgetary environment and all these impacts, we're focusing on defending the safety net that we had. For In 2011, after the Great Recession and the legislature was trying to fill this budget hole, we know that in Washington, the safety net was really, really slashed, and the budget was balanced on the backs of those that had the least. And so we're not wanting history to repeat itself in our state. And so instead, we're asking that we make cuts to red tape instead of cuts to services, making sure that we reduce the all of those additional burdens that are placed on folks and instead make sure that we have this really robust safety net where people can make their ends meet. We also want to take proactive steps to protect against those impacts of HR1, all those things I just mentioned, wanting to make sure that we have investments in that SNAP lookalike program. So anyone who loses their eligibility for SNAP because of immigration status has somewhere to land and can feed their family. Wanting to make sure that we are making sure that different agencies are working together for different work requirements. So you don't have to keep track of all these different things. So again, really filling those holes. And filling those holes costs a lot of money. And we know in Washington State, we have the second most upside down tax code, second only to Florida. And so we have a lot of room in terms of making sure that those who have the most and corporations that are super wealthy can also pay more of their fair share. And so we are really supportive of passing progressive revenue so that we can have a robust safety net so that everyone can meet their most basic needs. I also like to leave room for a little bit of hope at the end. There's some things that were proposed in the governor's budget, and the governor's budget isn't the end all be all, but it is sort of an indication of what he supposes will happen. So there was funding included in the governor's budget proposal that would cover SNAP for those families. So we were excited to see that. We were excited to see support for the Working Families Tax Credit, which is another bunch of money that folks can get. We were, like Guillermo mentioned, there's a bit of like a caveat there because it does use Climate Commitment Act dollars, so we don't want to rob Peter to pay Paul, but want to make sure that we do want to support the Working Families Tax Credit and make sure the climate commitment dollars go where they're meant to go. A couple other things we saw there was support for progressive revenue, which we hadn't seen before. And then these last two things weren't in the governor's budget, but just wanted to call out sort of reasons for hopefulness. One was that Representative Sean Scott dropped a bill that would raise progressive revenue, and it would go into something called the Well Washington Fund that would be specifically for these impacts of HR 1. So excited to see really fresh ideas coming out of the legislature. Um, and last but certainly not least are these engaged community members that we're working with who are ready to make their voices heard. We really believe in the strong impact that community members can have when folks who make the policies hear from the folks who are impacted most by the policies. So we're really excited that folks who are most impacted are ready to make their voices heard this session as well. Last thing, I'll end with an invitation. Every year we do a lobby day. So if you don't have anything going on MLK Day, January 19th, I'd invite you to join us for our lobby day this year down in Olympia. I'll put a link in the chat as well. Thanks so much.
Thank you so much, Leanna. So here is Leanna's contact information if you would like to get in contact with Leanna, and a picture of the wonderful staff at Statewide Poverty Action Network. Thank you, Leanna. Next slide, please. Next, I'm going to turn it over to Aksa on our team to talk about our energy assistance bill. So I will turn it over to Aksa.
Thanks, Guillermo, and hi, everyone. I'm going to be talking a bit about our Right to Energy campaign, which works to ensure energy assistance for low-income residents in Washington, and specifically the way that we're working to address this in this legislative session is through House Bill 1903. So I'm going to be covering a bit about the current energy landscape and needs in Washington, how House Bill 1903 hopes to address this, and sort of what gaps in the current energy assistance landscape exist in Washington, and again, how House Bill 1903 hopes to cover some of these. And as Guillermo mentioned earlier, there's a range of different factors that are contributing to the growing energy affordability crisis that we see in Washington. Some of these have a lot to do with aging energy infrastructure, increasing pressure on our grid and transmission. Another factor is climate change. And then lastly, rising energy demand across the state due to a variety of different reasons are leading to increased utility costs and consequently higher energy bills for residents across the state. And what this has resulted in is the fact that over 270,000 Washingtonians are energy burdened and hence face an energy affordability crisis. And I just want to clarify that when we say energy burdened, we mean households that are spending more than 6% of their income on their energy bills. Next slide, please. So what our proposal, which is the statewide monthly bill assistance program through House Bill 1903, what this hopes to achieve is to sort of cover that urgent need for securing universally accessible low-income energy bill assistance to reduce the over $270 million energy burden that currently exists in Washington. And the way that we're proposing to do this is through establishing a state-run monthly bill assistance program, which covers some of the issues that currently exist in the patchwork of energy assistance programs that we see across Washington state. Next slide, please. So what are some of the, I just want to cover some of the key elements that House Bill 1903 and the Low-Income Energy Assistance Program hopes to address. And these fall broadly within sort of simplifying administrative requirements, making it easier for households to sign up for the program. So the first one would be streamlining enrollment through automatic eligibility for SNAP recipients and offering tiered benefits based on income. So the amount of benefit or the monthly bill assistance that you get would be tiered based on your income. And then secondly, the program hopes to, by being housed within the state, the program hopes to reduce administrative burdens that currently exist on utilities, but also on community-based organizations that do a lot of the heavy lifting and the work for administering these programs. And then lastly, on households themselves that often have to spend a lot of time trying to navigate the landscape of how to sign up for energy assistance and how to access those funds. And then the last key element that I want to cover is that this program would require utilities to participate unless they can prove that they already serve at least 50% of their eligible low-income customers. So our goal for this program is to cover a larger proportion of energy burdened households, so that we can meet the needs of those households that currently are not being met. Next slide, please. And then I just also want to cover a bit about what the current landscape of energy assistance in Washington looks like and how this particular program, the Low Income Monthly Bill Assistance Program, through House Bill 1903, sort of addresses some of these concerns. And Washington state currently does have a patchwork of energy assistance programs, but these are undersubscribed and often they have a lot of strict eligibility requirements. So there's no centralized low-income energy assistance program. These programs are often run either directly through utilities or are federal programs that are currently facing a lot of uncertainty, such as programs like LIHEAP. So this program sort of moves away from that patchwork network towards putting together the program in a holistic, singular entity. And then, while one-time efforts to provide bill credits, we've seen those in the past, and similarly in the recent 2026 supplemental budget by the governor, there has been another 30 million allotted for energy assistance. These one-time sort of payments and funds cannot fill the gap that needs to be addressed through sustained and predictable funding, which again, the Low-Income Energy Assistance Program hopes to do. So yeah, I will now turn it over to Martha to talk a bit about the importance of energy assistance programs.
Thank you. So I just wanted to briefly just say that recently we surveyed our community members and our leaders from the coalition members, and in the top 5 category of what is most urgent, as you guys are aware, like several different immigrant groups, African immigrants or Afro diaspora immigrants have been targeted. And so we've asked what is their most urgent needs, and energy assistance or utility assistant was in the top 5. So there's a huge need to support. Our community likes to pay their bills, and so when they cannot pay their bills, it's an added burden on stress on top of everything else. And so, making sure that people are getting assistance in this time of need is critical. And we know there's a lot of competing needs right now, including healthcare. And we just, anytime we've had some instances where, to the point of the undersubscribed or kind of lack of availability on those assistance programs that are sometimes LIHEAP available at times. We've had community members go in for birth and come out with a large bill because they were kept from complications. And those assistance programs were not available. They couldn't help them. And so it is, there's only so much GoFundMe we can do. And so, just a request. And I know there's a lot of issues with the rural communities as well. But the need for utility assistance, especially during this time of the year, is I think something we can all state our communities are in need of. So I'll be here to answer any questions later, but I'm happy to pass it over to Representative Mena.
Thank you. And it's good to see everybody. Thank you for jumping onto this important webinar before session. And before I talk about 1903 and how I'm feeling about the prospects for this year, I want to acknowledge what we've heard a lot today about the state of community, given the cuts we're seeing from the federal government, and frankly, the corruption we're seeing from the federal government, who is no longer bound by the law or accountable to the law. So we are facing a really difficult situation in the state where we want to make up the difference in what we're losing for food assistance and healthcare assistance and housing assistance. And we're going to do the best that we can, but I don't think that really any state has the resources to fill 100% of the gap that the federal government is leaving. And so I think, as we head into this session and this difficult year, we're going to once again prioritize those things that keep people alive, are, food, housing, and healthcare. And as we're in that hierarchy of needs, we have to think about, what does it take for families to not just survive, but to thrive? What is it going to take for us to do at the state level to try to continue a culture where people can actually build the life that they want to lead for themselves and for their families? I think a big part of that, and we all know this and experience it ourselves and with our neighbors and in our communities, is affordability. The cost of everything is too high, and that includes utilities. So I've been really proud and honored to work with Front and Centered and this coalition on 1903 to think about how do we step up and step in as a state to fill that need. So, the price tag on something like this is really big, and that's just reflective of how big the need is. I don't think that we should shy away from how big that need is. I think it really demonstrates how much more we could and should be doing. So what we have before us is a difficult landscape, but also an acknowledgement, as was recognized in the governor's budget, that there is a need for utility assistance. And while his proposed $30 million doesn't anywhere near fill that need, I think it's a starting point. And so my goal for this year is to continue to quantify and qualify the need, which I know will be really relying on community to also continue to do that. And you guys do a great job of showing up as partners and leading the way, really. And to see if we can take that money and rather than create a one-time assistance program like we saw a couple of years ago with the $200 bill credits, put it into a structure that is sustainable so that we can continue to advocate for that funding and leverage that funding year over year to meet the need in a greater and greater capacity. Because we all know that one-time funding is great and we'll take it, but it doesn't give anybody the tools. It doesn't lift anyone out of poverty. It doesn't create a sustainable long-term solution, and that's really what we're looking for. So this is a bill idea that doesn't get a lot of opposition as an idea. I think the need is understood. I think the way that the bill is structured works really well, but we're going to have to fight for every dollar and getting that dollar structured and shaped the way we want it. But I'm here and willing for it, to fight for it. I know that you are too. And I've already started those early conversations with Guillermo and with other members of the House of Representatives. And that's what it's going to take. So I'm feeling cautiously optimistic about shaping some sum of money if we can get it this year.
Thank you, Representative Mena. So yeah, if you all want to sign up to receive alerts about this, you can on our website. We will be advocating for these funds throughout the session. But just want to thank Aksa, Martha, and Representative Mena for speaking to the issue. And now we are going to be touching on some of the investments that we want to protect and see during this 2026 session. So I'm going to turn it over to Michael to speak to some of the issues here.
Well, thanks, Guillermo. I will be talking a little bit, about the things that we've already discussed during this briefing, but given the current budget situation, we do understand that difficult decisions have to be made this legislative session. But we are very concerned, obviously, about the most vulnerable and overburdened communities, and the impacts that these difficult decisions will have on them. So, this budget shortfall shouldn't mean deeper cuts to programs and services that our communities, really rely on, especially during this time. And so that's why we're urging the legislature to protect social safety net programs that have already been impacted severely by federal cuts. Programs such as food assistance, housing assistance, healthcare are really important now more than ever. We urge the state to protect these programs and services for the most vulnerable communities. As already discussed, we want to fund House Bill 1903, the statewide energy assistance program, to Washington households in need of support in their covering their utility costs. While we, really greatly appreciate the $30 million that was listed in the governor's proposed budget, like it's been stated already, we need an ongoing program to bring sustained relief to Washington households. Now, we also want to continue to advocate for the HEAL Act and its implementation. HEAL agencies need full funding so that they can effectively implement the HEAL Act and realize the intent of HEAL, which is to reduce environmental health disparities. HEAL agencies have made pretty great headway already, but they need the proper funding to really facilitate the cultural and systemic change that we really need in order to realize that intent and to eliminate environmental health disparities in Washington state. Next slide, please. We're also, again, concerned about the use of Climate Commitment Act revenue to fund programs that do not provide direct and meaningful environmental benefits to overburdened communities. In the spirit of the HEAL Act and the environmental justice provisions within the Climate Commitment Act, these funds have to be protected. Promises were made to overburdened communities that at least 35% of all funds will provide direct and meaningful benefits to these communities. And so we want to protect as much of the money as possible so that we are creating these benefits that were promised to our communities. Community-centered programs are really critical to meeting the promises made. And so we really urge the protection of the CCA funds to go towards programs that reduce air pollution and health disparities in overburdened communities. And then finally, we are urging the state to implement progressive revenue options that have been discussed earlier by Leanna. So things like a high salary payroll tax or taxes on financial assets, and over-reliance on gas and sales taxes have disproportionately impacted low-income earners throughout Washington state. And it's also led to more budget cuts, which even further affect low-income earners. And so that's why we're urging progressive revenue options within Washington state. And so now I'm going to pass it on to Debelina, who will talk a little bit more about the impacts that these budget decisions have on communities and, what our communities really need during these dire times.
Thank you, Michael. So first of all, I'd like to lift up some of our shared priorities that have been already discussed by my fellow panelists. So funding statewide bill assistance program has been an ongoing priority for us at SAGE and our local communities with whom we engage. In 2020, we published the results of our community-based participatory research in a report called Powering the Transition. We enlisted hundreds of BIPOC community members to understand their views on energy security and climate change. And we identified a critical need to reduce energy costs for low-income households as we transition into clean energy. Since then, we've really dug into Puget Sound Energy's bill assistance programs and other investor-owned utilities bill assistance programs and have identified that they fail to reach a majority of the eligible households. So definitely this is a big priority for us and impacts our community here in Seattle and South King County. The second would be funding community-centered initiatives, prioritizing at-risk and overburdened communities. I'll share two examples. One of it would be community assemblies. We were able to leverage community assemblies funding at SAGE to engage with the local, and this is a hyper-local example, the local Chinatown International District residents for visioning around the Sound Transit station planning to understand technical, political, and equity implications of the station expansion in the neighborhood. A lot of the relational work and organizing that we were able to do was because we had these funds that invested in it. And right now, we are engaging with the same community to think through what a resilience hub would look like. And that brings me to the second example, resilience hubs, climate and community resilience projects. As I said, we are working with the neighbors and the community locally to figure out what are the impacts in the neighborhood. How do we build both climate and community resilience together with the hope that the community is collectively envisioning a culturally and contextually relevant resilience hub? Then that has the potential to address community stewardship of land, community stewardship of infrastructure, resource sharing, reduce health disparities, environmental benefits to local communities, and the understanding of all of this and access to information. Recent floods clearly show how much climate change has been impacting us. So it just lifts up the need for such resilience planning. And again, my fellow panelists have already highlighted how much our BIPOC and immigrant refugee communities are witnessing additional stresses under the current federal administration. Just this morning at a check-in, we heard from our Somali colleague on how his own community and how they have been harassed recently with the whole daycare situation. So how do we prepare our communities to protect each other, stand with each other, and be resilient in the face of such shocks? And that lifts up the need for us to build multidimensional community resilience projects. And the third one, last but not the least, is statewide progressive revenue. Locally, SAGE has been integral to the city's payroll expense tax implementation through the local Green New Deal campaign and the city's oversight board spaces. And a potential hyperlocal example could be a temporary bump in tourism taxes, let's say, in King County, which would need state authorization that mitigates the impacts of the FIFA World Cup on low-income communities near the stadiums. So just thinking about these examples and how it actually benefits local grassroots communities, most overburdened communities throughout. I'll pass it on to you, Guillermo.
Yeah, thanks so much, Debelina and Michael, for speaking to that. Next, I will turn it over to Jamie to talk about our Cumulative Risk Burden Act.
Hi, everyone. So CURB is one of Front and Centered's main legislative priorities. CURB stands for the Cumulative Risk Burden Act. And before kind of getting into the details of what that is, I'm going to just give a quick overview of how CURB originated. So in 2021, one of Front and Centered's work groups, the Local Pollution Prevention Work Group, was talking a lot about the disparate impacts of pollution that they were experiencing. And HEAL also passed. So there was a lot of conversation around environmental justice and how to make sure that community priorities are being centered in these conversations. Because of the concerns that were brought to us by member organizations in this space, we began researching early versions of CURB in partnership with the University of Washington School of Law, their regulatory and environmental law and policy clinic specifically, which led to the first version of CURB being run in 2023. And then last year, sort of the second version of CURB made it out of appropriations. It was referred to the House committee, and then the companion bill was also heard in committee. And so this year we are going to be reintroducing House Bill 1303, which is the version of CURB that would require environmental justice be considered as part of the environmental review process under SEPA, or the State Environmental Protection Act. So the reason that CURB is so important to a lot of our members across the state is because it requires a cumulative approach to permitting. So what is on the screen right now is kind of the classic formula that is used in Washington's environmental health disparities map, where you have a threat, you multiply it by the vulnerability, and that results in the risk, which is translated into a score on the environmental health disparities map 1 through 10. And this is really meaningful because it has a more holistic approach. The diagram that we have where kind of the current approach to permitting is facilities are assessed on a very kind of siloed individual basis. Whereas with CURB, we would want the impacts of the facility to be contextualized with the different sort of circumstances that are unique to that specific community, whether that be other forms of environmental exposures, whether it's being near a Superfund site, and also accounting for things like higher rates of poverty and higher rates of sensitive populations as well. And so, like I mentioned earlier, the version of CURB that we will be reintroducing this year, House Bill 1303, would require the State Environmental Policy Act to include an environmental justice element within the environmental impact statement. And so environmental impact statements are really important because they have protected public involvement periods at different stages of the permitting process. It's also really important because it can be a way to identify potential impacts of a project earlier on. And it is, of course, very important to really think about all of the different environmental factors and environmental impacts before moving forward with a planning decision. So in Washington State, there are currently no specific permit requirements that pertain to environmental justice. The quote that we have on screen was pulled from a response to comment from the Department of Ecology on a programmatic environmental impact statement for green hydrogen. And we just really want to highlight the fact that while there are guidances around environmental justice, we have HEAL. There are no explicit requirements in SEPA that require developers to think about environmental justice when they are explicitly thinking about environmental impacts. And so that means that we're not properly accounting for the harms that are being experienced. And it also means that we are not fully thinking about the ways that we could be creating benefits in communities where these permitting decisions are being made. And so I am now going to pass it off to one of our members. Mia Ayala Marshall is with the Duwamish River Community Coalition, and they have been involved in the local pollution prevention work group and have been a really big part of our CURB advocacy. And so Mia, I'm going to pass it to you now.
Thank you, Jamie, for that great overview. Mia Ayala Marshall, she, her pronouns. With the Duwamish River Community Coalition, which has long been a community steward for environmental justice in the Duwamish Valley, which is located in South Seattle. The Duwamish Valley is one of the most polluted areas in the entire Pacific Northwest, following 100 years of industrial dumping and toxic waste and historic disinvestment in the community. DRCC has worked tirelessly alongside community groups and neighbors for more than 20 years to clean up the water, land, and air, all while fighting to eliminate ongoing industrial pollution that makes our community one of the least healthy in the county. The Duwamish Valley is home to the communities of South Park and Georgetown, which are among Seattle's lowest income and ethnically diverse neighborhoods. In the Duwamish Valley, residents are disproportionately exposed to an array of environmental hazards that negatively impact their health and well-being, including a 5-mile-long Superfund site on the Duwamish River, 3 highways, 2 international airports, over 1,000 industries, and the ports of Seattle and Northwest Seaport Alliance. Cumulative exposures to pollution that the Duwamish Valley faces has led to adverse health outcomes, including a life expectancy that is 8 years shorter than the Seattle average and 13 years less than wealthier, whiter neighborhoods like Laurelhurst. Additionally, in the Duwamish Valley, we have the highest rates of childhood asthma hospitalizations in the county. An example of one of these environmental hazards is an ongoing fight we are leading against the Puget Sound Clean Air Agency, who recently finalized an illegal air permit that would allow for more tire burning at a local cement factory, which would result in severe health harms for our community. DRCC fought for over a year, submitting public comments, rallying community voices, hosting a protest, garnering media support, and even calling on local elected officials to speak out. Unfortunately, our regional air authority opted to ignore the serious environmental justice considerations present, as well as the law, and they finalized the permit. Last Friday, represented by Earth Justice, we filed an appeal with Front and Center to challenge this disastrous decision. Poor permitting decisions like these highlight the severe need for improved permitting processes that center community concerns, especially in environmental justice communities. Right now, the business as usual permitting process does not acknowledge environmental injustice, and it doesn't establish any new ways to prevent harm from being perpetuated. Business as usual also means that industries can pay for a permit, which allows them to pollute. This is a false solution. Adding environmental justice considerations into SEPA is the first step in addressing the lack of health protective permitting processes in environmental justice communities like the Duwamish Valley. This law will help impact permitting policy to protect the health and well-being of my community and the environment. And now I have the honor of passing it to Representative Minna.
Thank you, Mia, and thank you, Jamie, for the overview. I really appreciate you setting up the conversation for being able to talk about where CURB is this year. And much like I talked about before, right, we have basic needs, and clean air and clean water are absolutely basic needs. Just like there are disparities in the Seattle area, and in particular with Duwamish and other Seattle residents, we experience those disparities in the Tacoma area. So Parkland, for example, an area that I represent, has a life expectancy that's on average 10 years lower than other places in Pierce County, and it is, zoned industrial. So we have these layered policies on policies that have created, perpetuated, and cemented inequities that have led us into this situation where we have communities that we know are overburdened by air and water pollution who keep becoming the host neighborhoods for these industries that are polluting them further. And this bill is truly a step and one of many, many steps that we're going to need to stop the harm and to reverse environmental racism. As you saw in the timeline, CURB started out in 2023 as a much bigger and more ambitious bill. And I think that all of those elements that were in the original bill are needed, and we're going to need to get there. What we saw and what I introduced in the last session, I think, is a change in approach to try to get what we can given the current fiscal situation. And I would say that given where we are, again, with the actions that the federal government is taking, this is more important than ever, because we're seeing not only a mass rolling back of bedrock environmental laws, right, and rollback of climate policies and so on and so forth, but through the auspices of, stopping DEI, we're seeing a rollback of civil rights. Title VI protections, things that we bake into our agencies. And I think now more than ever, having a state mandate that requires that we do an environmental justice analysis that gives us the information we need, that puts pause on those projects so we can see if there are real harms, is necessary. That we're working against the wind and the wind is blowing this way. So, the bill made it all the way to House Rules last year. It's gone back to Appropriations Committee, which means, we don't have to go back to the very beginning. But what our task is this year is to figure out how do we move forward what we can and make it cost as little as possible. And so there's, more conversation to be had. I've been, taking a lot of intentional meetings and steps in the interim, and we'll be meeting with more agencies who have done their calculations to put basically what is a price tag on this bill to figure out, do they need more education? Are we at the lowest possible price because this is how much it costs to do this work and this is the work that's necessary? But I think finding a way to move forward with what we have and get an EJ analysis in place is the first and most important step. And I'll be working really, really hard to get a hearing in appropriations and to figure out, can we reduce costs through agencies to the greatest extent possible while keeping the bill whole and moving forward. So we're starting to make some progress in this area. And like I said, it's obviously these are basic needs. This is something I hear about a lot throughout the neighborhoods in the Tacoma, Parkland, and Spanaway area. People are really, it's a dignity issue along with an environmental justice issue, right? Like, we all deserve clean air and clean water. Your zip code shouldn't determine your life expectancy, and there's so much undoing and unlearning and educating that we have to do, that we've been doing together in coalition for years, but really putting pedal to metal this year, hoping that we can advance from where we even got to last year.
Thank you so much, Representative Mena and Mia, for speaking to CURB. Also want to thank the rest of our guest speakers and Front and Centered staff for speaking to our legislative agenda. We have here on the screen the different emails for folks who presented today from Representative Mena, Martha, Leanna, and Mia. We will also be sending out the slides and webinar recording for folks, for people who couldn't attend, or if you want to go back and listen to this in your car, you're totally free to do that. But I just want to thank you all. We don't have time for questions. We are about to hit the 1 p.m. mark, but just want to thank everyone again. We start session on Monday. We are going for 60 days. And hopefully during that time, we are advancing our messages of environmental justice, energy affordability, and talking about those environmental health disparities through the CURB Act all throughout those 60 days. And we hope to report back some good news at the end of session. But we know that the work is also going to continue during the interim. So please stay connected. Please sign up for our alerts. We always appreciate everyone's support. This is Front and Center doing the work, but we also can't do it without our supporters, people who are attending here, our partners at different agencies, our partners at different environmental organizations and different nonprofits across the state. The movement for environmental justice doesn't end here. So please, we look forward to your partnership. And thank you all again for attending today.